What if I told you you could buy a Leica lens in good condition with nice clean glass for 50 quid? Some of these lenses are not as expensive as you might think. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another episode. And today we're going to take a look at some Leica lenses. We're looking at the earlier lenses, the rangefinder Leica lenses, L39 mount lenses for these cameras, the Barnack rangefinders that were introduced to the market in late 20s, sometime early 1930s. The lenses and the bodies were certainly standardized by the early 1930s with the release of this camera. This is the Leica 2 of 1932. Prior to that point, each lens had been individually matched to each camera body, so there was a certain amount of handmade stuff going on in the early days, but by 1932 all those lenses had a standardized register and are all interchangeable, so it's those lenses you really want to go for. Now I've got this lens here. This is the Summitar 50mm. This is mounted on the Leica 3, an L39 camera, but you can use these lenses on other L39 cameras. For example, this Zorki 4 over here, and I'll just show you how spectacularly cool this lens will look sitting on a Zorki. The Zorki's been using its Jupiter lens, the Jupiter f2 50mm, Jupiter 8 f2 50mm, and that's a really beautiful lens, but this one is just slightly nicer. And if we put it on there, look how cool that camera looks. That is a very, very beautiful machine with one of these lenses mounted. It looks like it could have been made for it. Just balances nicely, just looks right. Everything looks absolutely beautiful on here. Now, there is some talk about Leica lenses not perfectly fitting on L39 former Soviet bodies like this Zorki 4K here, and apparently the register that the former Soviet manufacturers used is the Zeiss register, whereas of course the Leica lenses use the Leica register. Well, opinion is divided on this. There is one internet expert, a very, very widely respected man, who says, yeah, the register is different. There is also another, or was, I'm sorry to say he's passed away now, another very highly regarded internet expert who said he'd never noticed any difference at all in swapping between Leica and former Soviet lenses on these former Soviet bodies. As for my opinion, I really can't see that the former Soviet photographic engineers would copy the whole Leica design, because they did copy this Leica design to begin with. That was their first camera. I can't see they'd copy that whole design and then use a slightly different lens register. It doesn't make sense to me. It might well be true, but it just doesn't compute to me. So I can't see it for that reason. And another reason I can't really see it is because the lenses do interchange perfectly. I've never had any problem even shooting wide open. So for my money, yeah, you can use this. Sorry if this is a bit of a long digression, but you can use these lenses on former Soviet bodies. Okay, that said, the lenses we're going to look at today, they are three in number. They are this Summitar 50mm f2. We're also going to look at the Elmar 50mm f3.5, that's the coated version, and we're going to look at the Elmar 90mm f4, that's a nice long lens, medium telephoto lens for these cameras, and they're all lovely old lenses. So without further ado, let's get at it. Right, the first lens I'm going to talk about is the Elmar 90mm f4. f4, and that is the lens that I bought recently within the past year or so for £50. It was bought from eBay, it was advertised at £50. It had been sitting on there for at least a couple of weeks, and it seemed that nobody wanted it. I saw it and I thought, wow. I saw the word Leica, and then I saw the word Elmar, and then I saw the price 50 quid, and I pushed the button pretty jolly quick, because I thought, well, that will be a nice lens to have a play with and to use on the channel. And indeed it was. It was a beautifully made lens. I've actually sold it. I did sell it on relatively quickly, so I don't have it anymore, but I can show it you via the magic of videotape, digital binary recording thing. So there it is. Anyway, the 90mm Elmar f4. It's a beautiful, beautiful lens. I shot it on the Sony A7. I didn't shoot it on film. I shot it on digital, and it worked beautifully. I love the colours it makes. Very, very delicate, lovely colours. I've not seen colours like this from many other lenses anyway. They're just delightful, lovely, absolutely exquisite colours, and this lens is worth it for that alone. I just love the colours it makes. They're pretty rare and special, and they're certainly very, very pleasing indeed. Colours of this kind are not peculiar to Leica. There are other lenses that make colours that are this nice, but with a Leica lens we can be reasonably assured that we're going to get something nice out of the other end hitting the sensor or the film. They're perhaps not quite as hit and miss as some other lenses. Anyway, beautiful colours from this lens. Very, very nice indeed. Background blur is lovely and soft. It is an f4 lens, so it's not very fast, but it is pretty long. It's a medium telephoto. It's got a reach of 90mm, so it's going to make some blur. It's got the potential for making plenty of blur up its sleeve, and it can do that easily. In fact, even when you're shooting up to 10-15 feet away, still you're going to get some separation between your subject and the background, because this is an inherently blurry lens despite that relatively slow maximum aperture. The blur's got a very nice quality. It's lovely and soft. It doesn't break up into harshness. It doesn't fall apart or have a nervous breakdown just when you need it to be nice and soft. By and large, it stays nice and soft. This is a 1950s lens, so it's not quite as good as a modern lens in terms of keeping the blur soft, but it does a very good job of it. And blur is reliable from this lens. It's only occasionally that it starts to turn a little bit rough. Sharpness is good from this lens. It's an inherently sharp lens because it's an f4 lens, so that means that it's going to have a little sharpness. If that aperture opened up wider, the image would get softer. We'd lose that nice sharpness. Luckily, we have some very well-defined images from this lens, and I was very, very pleased actually with how sharply it shot. I would say it's kind of on a par probably with the Jupiter 11 135mm f4 from KMZ. That's the closest lens I can compare it to, closest in time, closest in type. So they're about as sharp as each other, these two, I would say. Very nice performance in terms of sharpness from the Elmar. Very nicely defined images with plenty of pop and plenty of 3D separation. It's a beautifully made lens, as well as all the Leica lenses that I've used are very, very nicely made. No play in any of the components. Everything turns nicely and cleanly and smoothly, and they do seem to stand the test of time, assuming they've been reasonably well looked after. They do tend to stand the test of time a little better than some other lenses, and it's clear this is a high quality piece of kit. So a lovely performance from the Elmar 90mm f4, and an absolute bargain at the price of £50 that I paid for it. Now, you may or may not be able to reproduce that bargain You probably will if you're patient enough, but you'll certainly find one of these for between £50 and £100, and it's an absolute bargain at that price. A lovely 90mm, exquisite colours, lovely sharpness and lovely blur, and it's got Leica Elmar written on the front. What more could you want? Staying with the Elmars for lens number 2, and this is another lens that I'm afraid isn't physically present with me today. I'm indicating its lack of physical presence by showing you that it's not there. That was a lens that was lent to me very kindly by a viewer, and of course that's gone back some time ago. Now, the lens that came to me, the little 50mm coated Elmar f3.5, it had seen better days, so it was a little tricky to compare it with anything, and it was a little tricky to find out what it could do and what it was capable of, because it was covered with the worst kinds of scratches, sometimes called cleaning marks, fine scratches on the front of the front element, which means that if you catch any kind of light, the contrast will immediately drop, and you've got to be pretty careful with your lighting conditions to coax anything out of the lens that it could originally do when it was new. So it's all dependent on lighting conditions. Originally, when I first shot the lens, I thought, oh gosh, this is an awful mess. I'm never going to get anything nice out of it. However, I did when I found out that if I went out in strong sunlight, kept the light behind me, more or less directly behind me, then I could get from the lens a much better image and get some idea of what it could have done, of what it would have done when it was new and in really good order. So naturally I pitted that lens against the former Soviet collapsibles. That's the Industar 22, the Fed 10, and I found from the little Elmar it was labouring at a disadvantage, but I found it to be very slightly sharper than the Fed lens, the pre-war Fed lens that I've got here. Very slightly sharper than that, but not quite as sharp as the Industar 22 that I've got on the Leica 2 here, but somewhere in between the two. Colours were very, very nice, but colours from the coated Fed 10 were actually nicer. And in fact, colours from the Industar 22 gave it a run for its money, gave the Elmar a run for its money. Background blur was nice, but I don't think it was very much nicer than either the Fed 10 or the Industar 22 could do. So I found with the 50mm Elmar that it actually was broadly on a par with the coated post-war Fed/Industar 10 lens. I found it was pretty much on a par with that, and I couldn't see really that the Leica would be very much better, although I must say that poor old Leica was labouring under a great disadvantage in that it was covered with fine scratches. Nevertheless, it was a beautiful lens, it is a beautiful lens. Get one in nice condition and it will make you some very beautiful images. A good one will cost you between £150 and £200. If you especially want an Elmar, go out and get one. They're a lovely little lens and they're an important part of photographic history. But if you just want a nice 50mm collapsible, get an Industar 22. They're far cheaper. They're about 60, 80 quid. And they make just as nice an image. You really won't lose out at all. Or get one of the coated Fed 10 lenses. That image is a little nicer. I think the colours are a little nicer than the Elmar gives, if not quite as sharp. But the margins we're playing with here are very small. The difference between these lenses are small. But if you want to save some money, I'd go the FSU route. If you really want to like a Elmar, then they are a beautiful lens. 150, 200 quid probably won't break the bank. And you can sell it on if you don't like it. Okay, our final Leica lens for today is sitting on the Zorki 4K here, and it's the Summitar 50mm f2. This one dates from, I think, the early 1950s, and this is the 10 blade coated version, and this is a gorgeous lens. This was very, very kindly sent to me by a viewer, Pippi Sanzina, so I hope everything's still good. Pippi, thanks for the loan. Still got the lens here. This is a keeper, and it's a lovely, lovely lens. I've used this lens just for general photography, really, although it will make a nice portrait. It does do some nice blur, and if you like swirly blur, if you like swirly stuff, bit of the swirly stuff, this lens will give it to you, just like the Zeiss Biotar and the Helios 44 and some of the CZJ lenses. This lens is a swirler. That means it's great for me. I love a bit of swirl. I think it gives a dynamic feel to a shot, a bit of excitement and a little bit of something going on. It might not be in your taste, but this one does it. It's a beautifully made lens. It kind of, the way it's made reminds me of steam engineering. Let's have a look over here. I'll show you a little more closely. So there it is. There's our Leica Summitar on the Zorki, and it's a beautiful old optic. There we can see the coatings, and it's got the sort of greeny, purpley blue coatings that I think do so much for colour performance in these old lenses. That is the colour you want on your coatings, in my experience. The aperture ring on here is at the front of the lens, and you can see it runs from f2 up to, is it 16? Yes, f16. That's a little tricky to see, actually, because these numbers are really tiny, so they're not that easy to see. Focusing is done with this little tab here, and that's really handy to find with the camera to your eye. It's not really sitting on the right position, in the right position on the Zorki here. It should be underneath the lens, really. Ought to run from left to right underneath the lens, but you know, that's a slight difference you find when mounting them on these FSU cameras. It has an infinity lock, and it goes there and locks. But actually, I always leave my lens out to its furthest extent because I don't like to put pressure on the rangefinder cam when the cameras are in storage, so I always leave it at closest focus distance for that purpose. It's a screw mount lens, and so we can unscrew it. L39 screw mount, nice easy mount to deal with. Focus please, thank you. There's the lens, look, it's beautiful. It reminds me of steam engineering. It has that sort of over-engineered feel that steam engines have. It's very, very substantial. It's made from steel and brass, and we're losing focus again. There's the rear element. Seems to be a multi-coated lens. That's really nice to see. Can we see those aperture blades in there? Yeah, I think we can see them in there. Nice 10 aperture blade version. So a very, very lovely little lens, and a very substantial lens as well. One that feels really good in your hand and gives your camera a little bit of heft. So there's the lens back on the Leica camera, and it does have slightly better proportions on that camera, but I think this will make any camera, any L39 camera, look extremely cool. It shoots really nicely, it makes beautiful colours, some of the nicest colours I've seen from a lens from this one. Very solid, very rich, full of body, full of depth, really nice, solid, strong colours. And of course this lens was made right at the time that colour film was coming in, so it needed to have a good colour performance. This lens needed to be a wow colour lens, so that, you know, when you get your new colour snaps back from the pharmacy or wherever you've gone to develop them, you go, wow, that looks fantastic. So really nice colour performance out of this lens. Nice background blur with some swill. It's pretty sharp in the centre, wide open. Across the frame there's a little softness at the edges and in the corners, and that disappears as you stop down, but pretty sharp wide open, and I've shot it wide open. I've not really seen any need to stop it down for any of the photography that I've done. A lovely lens, very nicely made, that makes very, very beautiful images. These lenses are not cheap anymore, and a good one will cost from £300 to £500 or thereabouts. Don't forget, you can buy one of these if you've got a little spare cash, but you don't want to keep hold of the lens forever. You can buy one at a good price and you can play with it for a while, and if you bought at the right price you can sell it on, and you're not going to lose anything. Prices of vintage lenses are not going down, but unfortunately this is not one of the cheaper vintage lenses. £300 to £500 for a good one, and I've got to say there are fewer and fewer good ones left, as I understand it, because the glass of these lenses is very soft and it can be very, very easily scratched. So if you do get a good one, keep it good, look after it, put a filter over there and preserve it. If you don't want to spend out lots of hundreds of quids, get one of these. This is a Jupiter 8 and I tested this lens against the Summitar there maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I found that the Jupiter was 99.95% as good as the Leica. It wasn't quite as good as the Leica, but it's very, 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 very near, and until that last 0.5%, the Jupiter follows the Leica and can do everything that the Leica can do. The differences are the blur from the Jupiter is very slightly more untidy, but only very slightly, and it's very slightly softer wide open, but only very slightly. So if you don't spend a load of cash on a Leica Summitar f2, spend a bit of cash on a Jupiter 8, another nice L39 lens, f2 50mm, and it will cost you around 40 quid if you're patient and persistent. So there we are, 3 beautiful Leica lenses. All of them are available more or less readily. Some of them are better bargains than others. One of them is a massive, massive bargain at the moment. And if you don't shoot any other Leica lenses ever, I suggest you try the 90mm f4 Elmar. Give it a spin if you find one at a good price and sell it on afterwards maybe. And don't forget you can do that with any of these vintage lenses, Jupiters, Leicas, Pentax, no matter what they are. If you buy one and you buy one at the right price, you can always sell it on afterwards, because the prices are not going down. They're going to continue to go up now because, why? Because nobody's making these lenses anymore. There's a finite supply and they are dying off as time goes by. So they can only go one way. So if you want to buy one, play with it, have fun, sell it on. Easily done. So I guess that is it from me for today. Many, many thanks for tuning in and watching. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do chuck us a sub. That would be appreciated. Many, many thanks to subscribers for your continued support. Many, many thanks to patrons for your support also. Heartfelt thanks to both subscribers and patrons. I really, really appreciate your support. If you'd like to become a patron of this channel, you can do that over at patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that for as little as $1 per month. But as for me, that's it for now. So if you're not doing anything too bothersome, troubling, or irritating, I've done this often enough, I should be able to get it right by now. Next week, please do join in and join me. I'm going to have to do this again. So if you're not doing anything too difficult, troublesome, bothersome or irritating next week at around this time, please do join me for a spot more xenography. Cheerio all.